and we were just remarking at the we're not quite in the same room. Sort of feels like maybe I should be kind of talking to you like this.
I know I'm not sure where to look
Like,
in
hey,
this
hey, Jeff.
environment, but
Fun with Zoom. Hopefully it won't be too distracting. Anyway, welcome to Echtus interviews. This is just a format that you're actually my second guest, so we're kind of still discovering the format, but basically just getting a couple heads together to talk through all the nerdy stuff that we talk through. And I think you and I have had so many awesome conversations since we met that one day I was like, let's record this and see what we can do with it. And here we are.
absolutely. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. I know we've been meeting so many times and really have enjoyed our conversations about customer education and in business results. And yeah, finally we're recording it and hopefully some people can find some value out of us, yeah, batting some ideas around. So yeah,
Yeah.
thrilled to be here.
Cool. Well, why don't you do a little bit of more of an intro, so that we know who you are and what you've been doing?
Awesome. Yeah, I'm Jeff, the founder of Motrain, and I help channel dependent companies grow their customer education or partner education programs, ultimately to increase business results and drive revenue. And I think what I got really excited about when I first saw you start up Echtus was your approach and your philosophy in terms of strategy, but ultimately your focus on driving business results. And although we have on the surface, it's I would say a gamification incentive engine. That's kind of like I call it the chocolate over the broccoli, and the broccoli is really the business results that we really are after. And I think it's really interesting. Our conversations around in this space have really largely had the same end goal. We've just had different strategies and different ways to get there. So I think that's what I've really enjoyed about our conversation so far. We're just coming at it from a different kind of approach, but same vision. So that's what gets me excited about whenever I get the chance to meet with you and chat. Yeah, to hear and learn about what you do as well.
Yeah, I've always found it really refreshing when we chat because I know your primary business is the tool, is the platform that you're selling.
Yeah.
And I work with a lot of people that are in the space of the technology, and sometimes the technology becomes the thing and the important thing to kind of, push out there, which makes sense. But what I really find refreshing with you is that we both have such a love as you said, of strategy and making sure that the client really understands and has a strategic approach. And I think you and I both really appreciate the consequences of that not being there. And we appreciate that from different angles, right? Like you more so if there's not a strategic plan going into using your tool, for example, and for me, like it's like a whole thing because I really just find it painful if I see people jumping into
Yeah.
tactics and the solutions and the technology before really understanding that strategy. But yeah, I mean, like from your perspective, um, what are some of the risks that you see that you have seen when you're, speaking with clients if they're kind of going into it without having that strategy?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen wildly successful programs when they use our technology and have a very defined and implemented strategy. And then we also have some clients that I would say have had mediocre, or maybe we could even call it ineffective results because they think that just turning this thing on and letting it go out to the masses is going to drive some impact, and it certainly doesn't. And I think that's where yeah, we come at it from an incentivized training framework to drive business results. And if you just turn it on without thinking of all of the different aspects of the business that will be impacted or could participate in it in a meaningful way versus just turning something on and hoping it does some magic. And I keep coming back to in this space, I often hear people say when they come to us, they say, we're looking to increase engagement and we're interested in gamification. And, full disclosure, I do not like that word. I've never liked gamification. And one of the main reasons is that it's poorly defined. And so when we talk strategy, I often will start with, okay, you're talking about engagement, you use the word gamification. What does that mean to you? And quite often, we try and steer the conversation into defining gamification. If you go into dig into the research, there's kind of the different categories of gamification that have umbrellaed under it. So there are serious games. Think of those as like kind of simulations and games that certainly are training, but they've made the game itself a training module. Then there's kind of another category, what's called content gamification, which is you take your content and you change it into a game. So then there's like a narrative or a storyline to follow. And then there's structural gamification, which is where you add game mechanics to non-game context, and then the content is irrelevant in the sense. It's more about the actions and the behaviors that you want to add this engagement mechanic to. And that's the latter is where we fall. We fall into structural gamification. And part of it is, well, there's a number of reasons. One is it's really expensive to do like serious games and build games specific for like one learning outcome or maybe a couple. So that's one reason. The other with content gamification, I find depending on the context of the training, it can get a little bit, it can feel a little bit, I'd say, I think that's where the gamification gets a bad rap, is it gets a little bit, it feels a bit gimmicky. It feels a bit, maybe it doesn't have the right fit for that. Plus, it's very specific to that piece of content. Whereas in structural, it's kind of this nudge. It doesn't matter what the content is, and then you can control a little bit about like who sees it, who doesn't see it. Maybe there's different personas, and that's a big other part of. I guess I might as well talk about that. Is the personas of your end users as well, and so thinking about like what are they interested in, what is the nature of the work that they do, but even in the gamification realm, Bartle, which is a kind of the guy who started the gamification research industry, identified 4 player types. So even within any audience, there's going to be kind of generally 4 categories. There's what we call killers, achievers, socializers, and explorers. And so all of those types of people have different interests and different motivations when it comes to game mechanics. And so recognizing the personas, then recognizing within that group, you're going to have people that fall into these buckets, and then using the strategies of your gamification tool to then start to leverage some of those behavior mechanics that you want to see based on who those personas are. And just to kind of give you a rough idea, most people are socializers, but you could have very competitive people, and they're more into what we call the killers and achievers. You have explorers who are kind of looking for the Easter eggs and whatnot. They like to poke around. So knowing that, that's where we kind of come into it and say, like, who are you targeting in your training? Tell me about their personas. What is it that what can you tell us about them? And then lastly, I always kind of point to the fact that e-learning is typically put in a digital ecosystem, and it's right next to a very much rewarding, dopamine hitting environment in terms of all of the social media and experiences that we have in digital worlds. And then we're asking people to go into an e-learning world, which is, it's like mental exercise. So I actually have an AI image that I need to post sometime soon, but it's a person walking into a building and there's like free ice cream on one side, and then there's a workout, like a gym on the other side. And so you're asking people to make decisions when they go into their digital environments, like, which way do you want to go? Like, do you want to go get the treats and the quick hits of dopamine, or do you want to actually work out? And so I think that's where, gamification or motivational design can nudge people towards, the workout side of that space. So yeah, there's a lot that we kind of consider when we look at, like, why would you do it? And then who are you trying to target? And then what behaviors are you trying to see more of?
Yeah, I mean that you just hit the nail on the head for where I think a large overlap between our interests come in, right? Because what you just described is actually the first part of my 6-dimensional programmatic approach, which is starting with the why, the program. Like, what are we actually trying to do with this educational training, certification, whatever the program is, and then moving into the who the audience is, and like understanding the segments of those audiences. And I think that overlaps really well with what you were just describing as far as those 4 personas. And that's just it's something I work with my clients a lot on, is understanding the motivations of your audience. Like there are different motivations there, and that is really what you're capturing. And I think, the word gamification, I agree. It's one of those trendy topics. That one, microlearning, is another one that I think hit the stage, and
Yeah.
it's like everyone wanted to do microlearning. Of course, AI now has become like everyone wants to use Gen AI, and gamification is there too, but there we have to like really kind of reel everyone into, okay, but why? You know,
Yeah.
like why, or what are we doing this for? Yeah, so it's really quite interesting. With regards to customer education specifically, I know that you have a variety of businesses you work with. What are like some of the case studies or some of the use cases, I guess, that you could see this kind of motivational behavior working with?
Yeah, I think that's the other interesting part about connecting with you in this space because your background is really in the SaaS space, and I think even the customer education community still has most people that are working in with software companies. And ironically, is like we have one that's in that space, but the majority of our clients are in other industries, so in manufacturing and cosmetics. Telecom is another one that's starting to pick up as well. And where these projects land is where these companies have a channel distribution system. So they sell their products and services through wholesalers, distributors, franchises, even independent contractors. And so all of these end users of those products and services are non-employees, and there's no requirement for them to take any of the training about those products and services. And so when when these companies are looking at how their distribution channels work, is they also are aware that there's other companies, their competitors are also in the exact same space, having the exact same touch points and conversations with these people. So when we're looking at, how do you help your company become the brand of choice? How do you gain mind share of these people that have a direct say in the purchase or recommendation of your product? When we incentivize the training and then make it so that we have systems in place to do, we call it the three pillars of growth for revenue in these spaces. That how are you going to acquire these customers? So how are you going to grab their attention and build awareness that you even have a training portal? And then once that you gain their attention, how do you get them to register? And then how do you get them to start actually consuming the content? So, step one is acquisition for us. Step two is really engagement and content consumption strategy. And then lastly, the third one, which most people don't think of when we talk about engagement, is the advocacy piece. And so how do you take your happiest, most dedicated customers that like to learn about your products and services, they recommend them, how do you get them to speak to them in such a way that they'll help you on the acquisition side, attract more of those same types of customers to come into that learning portal? And we're incentivizing that part. Like, I think if anyone's ever tried to get testimonials from a happy customer, like they're like, oh, yeah, yeah, I'll send that to you. But it's so hard to get meaningful testimonials. And so I'm incentivizing even that piece and then showcasing those types of happy customers and using their testimonials in marketing campaigns to drive that acquisition side is really the strategies that we've seen and work really, really well. And ultimately, we come back to what are those actions that drive revenue? So getting more customers into your portal that you can feed them content. And if they consume that content, not only do they learn about your products and services, but you start to gain become the top of mind among the other competitors. And so that's where most companies, after a period of time of working out with us, see that effect, that it's strategic. They come in thinking it's an engagement solution, or they're looking to have customers engage with the content. But we're looking at it as, if we help you get more customers, if they are better able to speak to your products and services, it's more likely that they're going to sell them or recommend them because it's easier for them to speak to them. And on the incentive piece, we work with these companies about offering incentives that are meaningful and will help those people in their job, help them either perform better or be more comfortable. And I think that's the kind of the engagement loop that we really have seen success in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, before I go on too long, I can tell you about a couple different, specific cases, use cases, but maybe we'll get into that in a little bit. But I
Yeah.
think it feeds into like what you do in terms of strategy, and I don't maybe that fits into like one of your key milestones around marketing. I think that's where you and I have resonated specifically with what we do.
Yeah, well, you and I had a conversation recently. I feel like maybe it was the last time we spoke on intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And
Yeah.
it's interesting with customer education. I've said this in a variety of different places, but like customer education is one of those unique areas of education where the learner is not really interested in learning. Like they're not in the mindset of learning. They're most of the time they're not like, "Ooh, I can't wait to take a course." There are times, of course, when especially when a business has really become the industry standard, like for example, AWS or Microsoft, and you have like a innate desire to go learn so you can get certified and that becomes part of your career. But in many cases, especially with well, I mean, in a variety of different kinds of organizations, we are using education strategically to try to change behavior, right? To teach people different ways of working with our system, different ways of operating in their role, and ultimately that's with the intention of driving stickiness, driving revenue, whatever it is. So this intrinsic, extrinsic, say those things three times fast, motivations are really interesting with customer education because you really have to like, find that balance and connect with both. So how do you see that with regards to what you're working on?
Yeah, and yeah, great points. And I think like right out of the gate with certifications, I mean, I would argue getting a certification is part of the extrinsic motivation that people have. Otherwise, why would you do it? I mean, if it's going to ultimately, if that certification earns you a higher paycheck or gives you upward job mobility, then clearly that's factoring into the reason why someone would be taking that course or a series of courses, not just solely for the pure love of the content. And so, as a previous educator, I think educational theory is very much drilled into this intrinsic motivation and the importance of instilling that in your education programs, and that's great. I think it's noble. I just don't fully, I guess I'd say, buy into the fact that it's the sole factor that you can have in any learning program. I think both factors are always at play, no matter what the type of training or education environment that you're talking about. And so I think looking at, I mean, I'm no psychologist, but if you look back into the research, like Deci does a famous study around self-determination theory, around people giving kids money for completing drawings. And of course, when they removed the payments, then kids found they stopped drawing as much as the kids that just did it for fun. And so that's a very well-known kind of intrinsic versus extrinsic study that continually gets brought up. And I struggle a little bit with those models where they're comparing an inherently interesting task like drawing or creating art is something that you might do just out of the pure enjoyment of doing it. And then relating that to training, like you said just a minute ago, there's very few people that are waking up and going, I can't wait to learn about that particular product and the nuances of it. Like I don't associate that type of content with the joy of, say, creating art on your own terms, on your own time. And so I think looking at any training program, there's always going to be extrinsic factors there. And so looking at one, what are they? And you can't get rid of them for one. So is there a reason to maybe look at embracing some of them to facilitate a transition towards maybe in the beginning of the program, it's more extrinsically driven, but then transition them to more of a intrinsically motivated state where they're coming in more on their own terms because yeah, I get rewarded for something, but I actually do like I do want to know more. Maybe it's about product knowledge, but more importantly, maybe it's about industry specific knowledge. So it could be about any product, but this company is providing me insights onto how to grow professionally. And that's what we see is that an incentive engine, gamification, whatever you want to call it, helps get these people in the door. So we get a larger funnel, we get more of these people. It helps drive that content consumption. And then what we find is that then it'll just kind of keep them coming back. And so the last part on that, the extrinsic part, is there are also industries that I think are I would say historically exposed to incentives and commissions and so those are the kinds of industries like it's not out of the ordinary. It's not like there's no expectation in other areas. I mean, a lot of those other industries, salespeople get they get increased commissions, they get incentives already based on performance. So bringing it into the training side isn't a big stretch for most of the time. But I think that's where the balance between intrinsic and extrinsic, to your point, who wakes up wanting to do training without any requirement? I think that's the other part. Sorry. Some of these companies that I think that you work with, if in the SaaS space, if a company buys software and then they also buy or get training that goes along with it, that's often mandated to the employees because, hey, we've got this new system, you all have to learn how to use it. So even though it's not the company's training, it's somewhat mandated down the line in terms of you have to learn this stuff. Where a lot of the companies that we work with, that's not the framework. It's more, we have products and services that we'd like these people to learn about. There's no requirement and it's not mandatory. So that extrinsic factor of like, learn this software or you might lose your job is not there. It's not part of what these companies do in these channel dependent situations.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of the intrinsic, extrinsic, and motivational aspect of this is I think it's so important for any educator who's listening to this and who's considering gamification to have that balance because it's such a delicate balance where we don't want to just be incentivizing things like completions where the actual learning itself doesn't drive any or contribute to any behavior change, right? Because that's where you can kind of over-index on gamification where it's just like, oh, we got them through this course and here's your candy for that. And what we want to do is find that balance where yes, we get them through that course and that course helps them in their job or working with our solutions better or whatever it is, or like understanding what so you have to find that sweet spot. And I think that's part of this strategic conversation. If we know the strategy going in and we're clear on what we're trying to drive, who we're trying to drive it with, and what those motivations are and what those behaviors are, then we can like use the motivational tools along with like solid instructional design and engaging content to kind of create the right path for people,
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of what you're just triggering a couple things that come to mind. One the other part is from a previous educator's point of view, I would spend an enormous amount of time and effort trying to create the most engaging content. And anyone who's done that before and they send it out to the mass and say, okay, I want you guys to learn this stuff, and it just falls flat. People they just don't care, they're just not interested for a whole bunch of reasons. It has nothing necessarily to do with the content that you've created. But I think what happens from someone in that position is we suffer from what I call content creator bias. I think my content and my learning opportunities that I'm putting in front of this audience are the best. And most of us as professionals, like I always laugh at when people say you should really put out engaging content. I'm like, well, that's table stakes. Like yes, you should be. That's the expectation. But even still, I think we as the content creators are the ones who expect that will stand on its own and will get people to come in and engage with it. And I've just never found that to be entirely true. Yes, your top achievers top 10 to 20% of people who are super motivated for all sorts of other reasons are going to come in and do that, but the masses are not. And so that's the other part is like is targeting, the majority of people, not just the small kind of top students. I think the other part on what you said, I think with the SaaS or software side of things, there's an interesting opportunity where we can gamify or incentivize the content consumption. Say we look at course completions, but because of the nature of structural gamification, we can also listen to and award the behaviors related to that training. And that's where I think the kind of evolution or some of the next steps is going to be is looking at, okay, if we incentivize or encourage people to do more training, but we really just we want to see those behaviors, not just we want to encourage those behaviors. So that's where we're starting to transition to is actually the outcomes of the training and start to incentivize those. And not just because you want to see the behaviors, but it's also then it transitions to more of a recognition status. Like we're recognizing that you're actually doing what we want you to do.
Yeah. Yeah, with SaaS, I think there's more possibilities with that sort of tracking. I have worked in SaaS, but interestingly, I've been finding more and more clients over the last year that are not in SaaS. So I'm actually working now with payments industry and investing and some other interesting. I'm not in quite in like I think manufacturing is more what you've specialized in historically. So I haven't found that yet. But there's a quite a variety of businesses out there that are all thinking about customer education and thinking about incentivizing. So how does this work? I mean, when we think about SaaS, I think we do have probably that's where a lot of people go with the gamification conversation because we know that more for SaaS. And we can do things like incentivize in the digital, like in-app space. But what does it look like for you to do that outside of that space? What are some, examples you've seen?
Yeah, I think when we get to the kind of the structural side of things, we typically will try and look at implementing the gamification um, from a training perspective. We look at it as a feedback mechanism. So what we're doing is we're providing instantaneous feedback that people are progressing through the content or in a manner that is desirable, that's going to meet a lot of the objectives of why we're doing this. So I think that's one of the problems in any learning environment is that the feedback is too far away from what's actually happening. And so like in our case, we introduce a virtual currency that's constantly being updated and added when people are taking the desired actions. And so that is that feedback mechanism communicating to the learner in very small increments of time or behaviors that, yes, you're doing the right things here. So that's one. And then when we get to like, what does that power? I think most gamification systems fail because there's a lack of autonomy. Like you get badges and you get, you get points and I'm on some leaderboard. And there's no way to really influence the system or like it's just very passive in nature and it becomes systematic. So a virtual currency, sure, it can power leaderboards. Sure, you could attach it to badges if you wanted to. We don't, by the way, we're not into that mechanic. We are more into levels, and levels are where thresholds you level up when you meet a certain threshold of those of that currency. And what that does is it starts, and then progress bars showing you how close you are to the next one. And what that does is you can see within your customer list, like even if you don't display leaderboards or levels, you can start to see who are our most engaged customers, and then who are our least engaged. And then you start to look at how does that help your marketing awareness? So we can start to look at, hey, how are we going to start to communicate to our top most engaged learners versus our least engaged ones? Are the least ones, do they not remember how to get to the portal? Did they forget that they have training opportunities? So I think using the gamification mechanics is not just an engagement tool, it's how you start to then speak to your customers on a marketing side and a strategic side to get them to do more. And in terms of the incentive piece, we really like to use the framework around what's called SAPS. A gamification guru named Gabe Zickerman came up with it. And I really like it because SAP stands for status, access, power, and stuff. And so back to that persona conversation we had at the beginning is really the like looking at that customer group and say, okay, what kinds of incentives land in those categories and what would be most appealing to those types of people? So status, getting people to be, mentioned or awareness, or if you're at a certain level, maybe you get access to premium content. Um, when we went to like it's more like access on that one, but access could be invited to a special group, a special speaker or an event. Power is more around like decision making, like what direction should this take? Maybe you're put in charge of a specific community. And then stuff is the last one, and that's where it could be physical, like it could be the swag side of things. It just depends on what is the nature of the program and who is targeting. But that framework typically falls well into like figuring out who, like what kinds of incentives would be meaningful to people that you're targeting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like you need the audience segmentation kind of going into it, and then the actual motivational tool helps segment even more because you're kind of seeing that data come from, from all that. So it's kind of this sort of
Yeah.
to itself. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. And even culturally, like we're finding now, like culturally, those incentives are very different in, say, North America versus Europe, and what people like, even when the training is targeting the same types of, I'm going to say types of people or different job roles, then even just culturally, there's differences there.
yeah. All right, so let's wrap it up with sort of some flash questions I have for you, which would be, so customer education leader is has been tasked by their own executive team to implement gamification. They come to you, Jeff, we got to implement gamification. What's the first question you're going to ask?
I would ask, do you have support from other departments in your company? For example, marketing. Like, what's your relationship with marketing? Because the strategies that we implement are massively leveraged by the marketing team, not only to get them involved and bring their larger budgets, but also that they will see a benefit. We will help them acquire more customers and gain a meaningful ongoing digital dialogue with them through this mechanic. So that's usually the first question. Who else, like, as you know, customer education touches on so many aspects of the business. So I always want to know, who else are you able to get support from, either directly or like, do you have a relationship with this department? If not, can I encourage you to start one with them because of the implications of that? So that's typically what we look at. Then from there, we look at, okay, what's the nature of the program and where is it like, so in terms of how much content do you have? What does your content pipeline look like? Is it static? Is it dynamic? Are you growing it? How quickly can you grow it? What's the nature of the content that you have now versus in the future? So we examine kind of where they're starting at. And then we look at geographic rollout and job rollout. Like, is there a specific area or the geographic location that you would want to start with and then from there, look at where would you want to go next in terms of rolling this out. And then really just like and then from that, how much support do you have? Like, how big's your team and then who else do we need to bring in? So it's kind of starts, we always try and start small, pick one region, one group of people, get your content set up so that we connect to the motivational design strategies. Let's see some growth and then put like a 6-month time frame on that, maybe a year, and then look at like how quickly, once we see success there, how quickly do you want to grow that?
Yeah, I feel like you got ahead of me in that my last question, which was, okay, so did all that. Now, how do I look at the ROI of my investment in gamification?
Yeah, that's a great one. So we look at a couple of things just on the acquisition side. So I think like with any business, it's really not that complicated when you look at it. If you have more customers, you have more sales and more revenue ultimately at the other end. So customer acquisition is a big one we look at. And then we build tools to help with that. So we build what we call kickoff coins or welcome coins, which is like awarding people for the very first time they come into the LMS. And so that, I mean, it's a feel-good message, but it's really a marketing message like, hey, come sign up for our training and you can earn this for some swag. So that's kind of the kick, the start of the acquisition side. We also have a refer a friend one that's very successful. You can earn rewards for referring your friends. So lookalike audiences. So marketing teams love that because they can leverage those tools in their marketing kits to drive customers into the program. And then from there, we look at really what does the content consumption look like? So how much content do you have? And then like how quickly can we get it to be consumed? So we do measure completions as a metric for measuring how much content has someone completed, looking at also all of the analytics, like which courses are your most completed, which ones are your least, and then we look at, is there different product types that you want to offer? But
Mhm.
really those two metrics there, and then the advocacy piece, we start to look at how many customers are putting in testimonials, willing to share their experiences. And then from there, depending on the client and if they can start to then start to measure through their CRM and even through the content consumption, then we look at how much are our trained customers selling versus our untrained ones. And then what the data is showing us is that there's a distinct difference there, that the trained customers are buying or selling more of those products. And so to give you like an idea, our most successful client, we've seen increase of tens of thousands of customers globally in over 20 countries in 4 years of working with us. And then we measure it always like it's a publicly traded company. So we look at what is their annual revenue increase. And we can see from the time we started working with them to now, they've added $600 million of annual revenue. And so I can't say that's all from our strategy, but a large part of it is in terms of we can see their sales numbers, their revenue, and how that's all aligned with their strategic vision. And this incentivized training program is really comes from the top. It's like, this is how we're a channel dependent company. This is how we're going to push out our distribution channels. And so that's how we measure it. And even from the feedback we get from the clients, it's like, this is a keystone to what we do at the company. So yeah, it takes a couple of years to kind of get going, as you know, like yours, like a kind of question back to you, like when you from your most successful implementations with the frameworks and strategy that you bring in, like how do you measure it and what timeframes do you typically see?
Yeah, I mean it's the same as you said. So it's we have I talk a lot about a measurement framework. So you have this sort of leading, lagging metric, connecting the dots essentially to when you start to see this impact, which can be a year to 2 years. There's like that lagging aspect of the metric, right? So
Yeah,
we're kind of tracking along the way that, as you say, we start with the engagement piece. We got to get into the content. So that's some of that early
yeah,
metrics. And then you got to see that the content is being consumed, as you said. And then we're looking at the efficacy of the content. Are they actually changing behavior? And so it's just really dependent on if it is a SaaS business, you tend to have a bit faster flow there
yeah,
because you can track these things.
yeah,
And if you're in something that is more, I mean, really pretty much probably any other business where it's just longer term, this sort of butterfly effect of something you start in Q1 of 2023 and you start to see the effects of that in
yeah,
Q3 2025. So it's definitely yes, but I think what's really important that we both see is that we're not just doing something for the sake of it and then hoping down the line that we can connect some dot to that, some metric to that, but that we're kind of starting with that clear strategy up front. We're starting with what our success metrics should look like. We're starting with like, what's the plan here? What are we trying to drive so that we can track these things along the way and we can pull levers and tweak things and make decisions along the way. So we're not waiting 2 years to see, oh, this worked or it didn't
yeah,
work,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's inherently the biggest challenge in customer education is really the lag time between an effective implementation strategy and actual business results. Like,
Right.
does not happen overnight. And so what we find is that the most successful programs are ones where high up, like we're talking C-suite people, believe that this is the right strategy and are willing to invest couple years into actually seeing the payoff down the line. And so that's where I think the challenge is for us, is to try and better communicate these effective strategies in terms of getting those business results. But it's a process. It's not something that you're going to see overnight. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. All right, Jeff. Well, we finally did it.
Awesome.
We got through our interview, and it was so much fun to chat with you and in our weird coffee bar space. I think this is what this
Yeah, I don't
is.
even know what it is. I don't even know if I looked at you. Like, this is the most strange conversation where I was kind of looking, like, I still have to look that way at you.
Yeah, no, it's this
Yeah.
way.
Other way. There we are. But
All right.
yeah, thank you so much for having me. That was a great chat as always. And yeah, I love the work that you're doing. And yeah, hope we can continue working together.
Yeah, likewise, for sure. All right. Take care, Jeff.
Awesome. Thanks, Vicky.